I thought I was alone. That's the only excuse I have. It was 0200 hours on the observation deck of Caithra Station. The lights dimmed to that dull amber they use at night, and I was staring down at the planet through 6 inches of reinforced glass, thinking I was the only idiot awake. So I said it, out loud, barely above a breath. She's so gorgeous. I wonder if she'd marry me. And then I heard a soft intake of air behind me. The kind of sound someone makes when they've been hit with something they didn't see coming. And I turned around and saw Naira Vel standing 6 feet away, translator disc glowing faint blue at her throat, staring at me like I'd just set the room on fire. She'd heard every word. Before I tell you what happened next, let me back up because you need the full picture. And honestly, this one's got more turns in it than I expected when I was living through it. Also, if you're the kind of person who likes stories about humans getting in way over their heads with people from other worlds, hit subscribe now, because this channel is basically built for you, and I've got a lot more of these. I'd been on Caithra for 4 months by the time that whisper happened, but the story really starts on day 1, when I met Naira for the first time and immediately insulted her without meaning to. I was part of the small human engineering team brought in to help retrofit the station's original reactor housing, old Ilvani tech, older than the treaty itself, the kind of thing nobody fully understood anymore, human or alien. Naira was assigned as our translator, not because she needed the job, her English was cleaner than half my co-workers, but because her father, Warden Thessaly Vel, sat on the Threnna Accord Council. And Warden's daughters on Caithra didn't get to just disappear into a normal posting. Everything she did reflected on her house, whether she liked it or not. On my first day, I stuck my hand out to shake hers, because that's what you do. She looked at my outstretched hand like I'd offered her a live wire. "We don't touch strangers," she said, not unkindly, just factually. "Among my people, touch is reserved for family or for those you've formally acknowledged. You've done neither." I turned 3 shades of red and apologized about 6 times, and she watched the whole performance with an expression I'd later learn to recognize as her trying very hard not to laugh at me. It wasn't a good start, but it was at least memorable, and over the following weeks I noticed she never assigned herself to my sections of the retrofit unless she absolutely had to. I told myself that meant nothing. I was wrong about that, but it took a long time to find out how wrong. She was careful, measured, the kind of person who chose every word like it cost her something to spend it. 4 months in, she'd given me exactly nothing to work with. Polite, professional, a wall with excellent manners. And I'd more or less decided that whatever I felt about her was a problem I was going to have to solve by myself, quietly, and never mention to anyone. Which is, ironically, exactly what led to the whole disaster. The night on the observation deck wasn't supposed to be anything. I couldn't sleep. Reactor calibration had gone sideways that week and my brain wouldn't shut off. So I'd wandered up to the deck to stare at the planet and clear my head. Same as I did most nights when the work got in my skull and wouldn't leave. I didn't know Naira couldn't sleep either. I didn't know she was standing in the shadow of a support column on the far side of the deck, half hidden, doing the exact same thing I was. Ilvani's skin carries a faint bioluminescent undertone, barely visible in full light but present, always, if you know to look. In the dim amber of the night cycle, hers should have been easy to spot. I just wasn't looking. I thought I had the whole deck to myself, and that's the only reason the words made it out of my mouth at all. She's so gorgeous. I wonder if she'd marry me. "You need to understand something about my people," she said, once she found her voice again, and I nearly went through the observation glass. Her hand had come up to touch her throat, like she was checking the translator disc was actually working, like maybe she'd misheard. "Our hearing range isn't like yours. What you think of as a whisper, I hear the way you'd hear someone shouting across a room." "Oh," I said. Extremely intelligent response. 10 years of higher education, and that's what came out. "You didn't know that." "I did not know that." She was quiet for a second, and I watched something complicated move across her face. Ilvani don't blush the way we do, but there's a shift in the light under their skin when they're flustered, a kind of dimming and flaring, and hers was doing both at once. Rapid, like a heartbeat you could see. "Then I apologize." she said finally, "for hearing something you didn't intend for me." And she left. Walked straight out of the observation deck like the conversation was over. And I stood there for a long, stupid minute, running the numbers on how badly I'd just wrecked the only real thing I had going on this station before it had ever properly started. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I told myself the smart move was to never bring it up. Never look her in the eye for longer than a work briefing required, and hope the entire universe agreed to forget it had happened. The universe, as it turned out, kept excellent records. 3 days later, I found out exactly how good those records were when Warden Thessaly Vell summoned me to his office. He was not a small man, in the way that matters on Caithra, tall even by Ilvani standards, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like every word you said was being filed away for later use against you. His office looked out over the Accord Hall, an enormous chamber built around something the Ilvani called the Concord Archive, an ancient structure predating their spaceflight. Predating even their written language, according to the researchers on my team who'd spent years trying and failing to explain what it actually was. Nobody fully knew. It listened somehow. It recorded. It had been doing that for longer than anyone could account for, and the Ilvani treated it the way we might treat a courthouse and a cathedral fused into one building. "You made a statement?" the warden said, without preamble, in proximity to the archive threshold. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The observation deck sits directly above the old resonance chamber. The archive hears what is said there. It has always heard what is said there. He slid a data tablet across his desk toward me. On it, in careful Ilvani script with a human translation underneath, sat the exact words I'd whispered 3 nights ago. Logged, time-stamped, filed like it mattered. She's so gorgeous. I wonder if she'd marry me. I didn't mean for anyone to hear that, I said. I definitely didn't mean for it to go into some kind of official record. Intention is not how the archive works, the warden said. It does not record everything. It has not recorded a new entry in 11 years. It records only what it judges to be true, spoken without performance, without audience, without the shaping we do when we know we're being heard. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face recalibrated, like he was reconsidering me from scratch. You believed yourself to be alone, which means by our understanding you meant it. I sat down without being asked to, because my legs needed the help. Under the Accord, he continued, a spoken intention of bonding, recorded by the archive and witnessed by the named party, initiates a formal courtship period. 90 days. My daughter has been informed. She has not rejected the record. She hasn't... Wait, she can't just... I stopped. Tried again. This was an accident. I was talking to myself. This can't be how your marriage laws actually work. It is exactly how they work, he said, and has been for longer than your species has had writing. He studied me another moment. I did not tell you this to trap you, Renault say. I told you because my daughter has spent 4 months speaking of nothing but your work ethic and your terrible jokes, and has not once in 26 years allowed the archive to hold anything of hers. And now it holds something of yours. I find that worth paying attention to. He didn't say it warmly. Wardens don't do warm. But I understood, walking out of that office, that I'd just been handed something closer to a blessing than a threat, wrapped in enough formality that it had taken me most of the conversation to notice. I want to be clear about something, because I know how this sounds. It wasn't like the archive just handed me a wife whether either of us wanted one. The 90-day period wasn't a countdown to a wedding. It was a formal courtship, slow and public, with an opt-out built into every stage of it. Either of us could walk away, no shame, no penalty. What the archive had actually done was simpler and stranger than a contract. It had taken a private moment and made it public. And now Naira and I had to figure out, in the open, in front of her family and half the station, whether what I'd said in the dark was actually true. The first few weeks of the courtship period were a disaster. Honestly, we didn't know how to talk to each other now that the thing was named. I apologized so many times she finally told me flatly that if I said I'm sorry one more time, she was going to log a formal complaint with the retrofit supervisor. I believed her. I stopped apologizing. It didn't make things less awkward exactly, but it made them survivable. We started having lunch together. Required. Technically part of the courtship protocol, which mandated a minimum number of witnessed meetings per week, so the process couldn't be conducted entirely in private and later disputed. Neither of us said much at first. I remember one lunch where we sat in near total silence for 20 minutes, both of us pretending to be extremely interested in our food, until she finally looked up and said, "This is worse than the observation deck," and I laughed so hard I nearly choked, and something in the tension between us cracked open just slightly. That's when I found out she hated the formal Ilvani greeting, the forehead press, the held breath, and had always privately preferred the human handshake I'd offered her on day one, the one she'd rejected so firmly. She told me this like it was a small confession, like admitting to liking something foreign was itself a minor rebellion. I told her that made two of us who'd been quietly rebelling against her culture's rules without meaning to, and she said that wasn't remotely the same thing, and we argued about it for the rest of lunch, and it was the best conversation we'd had in 4 months. The gift happened around week 3 of the courtship. Human custom. You like someone, you bring them something small, no big deal. I found a little pressed glass flower in the market district. Pale blue, delicate, and I thought, harmless, pretty, nothing that could possibly go wrong twice in one relationship. I did not know that among the Ilvani blue glass, anything is a betrothal gift. Has been for 1,000 years. You don't give it to someone you're getting to know. You give it to someone you've already decided to marry, as a formal signal to their household that negotiations should begin in earnest. She opened the box in the hallway outside the engineering bay, in front of 4 members of her extended household staff, and the hallway went dead silent in a way that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "Ren," she said, very carefully, "do you understand what this means?" "It means I have terrible luck," I said, "and possibly the worst timing of any human alive." And she laughed. First real laugh I'd heard out of her since this whole thing started. Surprised, unguarded, like it had escaped before she could stop it. And something in the tension of that entire miserable hallway just broke apart at once. She kept the flower. She told her staff it was a private matter, which on Caithra is basically a formal instruction to mind their business, and for the first time since the archive logged my stupid whisper, she looked at me like she actually wanted to be there. That's when things started for real. Not the legal thing, the real thing. We stopped scheduling meals and just started sharing them. She stopped translating her world for me and started explaining it instead, which sounds like a small difference until you live inside it. The first is a job, the second is an invitation. I told her about my family back on Earth, my mother's insistence that I call every week even from a station 4 systems away. My little brother, who thought aliens were going to be exactly like the movies and had been relentlessly disappointed by my reports that most of them, like most humans, spent their days doing paperwork. She told me about growing up as a warden's daughter, about the weight of being watched her entire life, about how being assigned to translate for the human retrofit team had, for the first time, felt like something that was actually hers. Around week 5, I found out she'd requested me specifically for the project months before any of this started, because she'd read my engineering reports and liked the way I wrote them. Clear. A little dry, occasionally funny in the footnotes where nobody was supposed to be funny. It's possibly the strangest compliment I've ever received, and also the one I think about the most, because it meant that whatever this was had started long before I ever whispered anything into the dark. I'd just been the last one to find out. There was a complication I haven't mentioned yet, and it started showing up around week 6, in the shape of a man named Korvath Idrin. Korvath was another warden's son, close to Naira in age, and it became very clear very fast that he considered the courtship an inconvenience rather than a settled matter. He didn't confront me directly. Ilvani politics doesn't work that way. Not among the houses. But he started appearing at the same functions Naira and I attended, always with some perfectly reasonable excuse, always positioned just close enough to remind everyone in the room that he existed and had, apparently, been assuming for years that he and Nira would eventually be paired. "He's not a threat," Nira told me. The first time I asked her about it in the too careful tone she used when she wanted a subject closed. Our families have known each other a long time. That's all. I let it go because I trusted her. and because pushing on it felt like exactly the kind of thing that would make me look insecure in front of an entire alien government that was already watching my every move with academic interest. But I noticed the way Korvath's expression shifted whenever the archive was mentioned, a flicker of something that looked less like polite, disappointment, and more like a man doing arithmetic on how to make an inconvenient record disappear. Should have paid more attention to that flicker. I didn't, because week 7 brought a different kind of trouble and it ate up all my worrying. The reactor retrofit hit a wall. The old Ilvani systems didn't just predate written language. Some of the control architecture was, as far as anyone could tell, partially alive, in the loosest sense the researchers were comfortable using. Nobody wanted to touch it without understanding it first, and understanding it first meant weeks of delay, and weeks of delay meant a very unhappy chain of command on both sides of the treaty. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, running diagnostics with Naira translating priority alerts from a system that spoke in a dialect even she found half unfamiliar, and somewhere in that stretch of exhausted high-stakes work, something between us settled into place that all the careful lunches in the world hadn't managed to build. We weren't performing a courtship anymore. We were just 2 people, tired and scared of blowing a hole in a space station, trusting each other completely because there wasn't time to do anything else. We fixed it. Nobody blew up. And that night, standing in the corridor outside the reactor housing at Oro 300 hours, filthy and wired on adrenaline, Naira took my hand. No ceremony, no formal acknowledgement. Just took it, and didn't let go for a long time. That was the first time she touched me on purpose. I remember thinking it meant more than the flower, more than the archive record, more than any of it. I didn't know Korvath had seen us through the corridor window until much later. 61 days into the 90, I thought we were fine. I thought we were more than fine. I was wrong, but not for any reason I could have predicted. It happened during a full session of the Accord Hall. Dozens of wardens. A handful of human diplomats, half my engineering team there for an unrelated infrastructure briefing. Korvath stood during the open floor period and, with the careful phrasing of someone who'd rehearsed it, raised a formal question about the validity of the archive's record. He didn't attack me directly. He was too smart for that. Instead, he suggested respectfully that a human, new to Caithra, unfamiliar with the resonance properties of the deck, could not reasonably be said to have understood the weight of what he was saying when he said it, and that a courtship built on an unwitting accident deserved review rather than automatic legitimacy. It was a good argument. That was the worst part. Half the hall nodded along, and I watched Warden Vell's face go very still. And I watched Naira go pale under the shifting light of her skin. And I understood in that moment that this wasn't really about legal technicalities. Korvath was betting that if the record got reopened for review, delayed long enough, picked apart by enough careful men in enough careful robes, it would simply die of exhaustion before it ever became a marriage. The chamber's ambient lighting flickered, which, I was told later, never happens. And a voice came through the hall's speakers that wasn't the archive's usual clipped recitation of logged statements. It was different, slower, almost thoughtful. "Query," it said, first in Ilvani, then in English, like it wanted to make sure I understood too. The human statement was recorded as truth. The bonded party's response has not been recorded. Clarification requested. Nobody in that hall, human or Ilvani, had ever heard the archive ask a question before. Even Warden Vell looked, for the first time since I'd met him, genuinely uncertain. Every head in the chamber turned to Naira. Later, she explained it to me properly. The archive wasn't just a recorder, not really. Over the centuries, whatever intelligence lived inside that ancient structure had developed something close to judgment. It didn't record everything said near it. It waited, listening for the rare moments when someone spoke without an audience in mind, without performance, without hedging, and it had gone 11 years without hearing anything it considered worth keeping, until I stood alone on an observation deck and told the dark exactly what I was actually feeling. Korvath's carefully rehearsed challenge, delivered in front of an entire chamber of witnesses, was the furthest thing from that kind of truth the archive had ever measured. Maybe that was why it had chosen, for the first time in its recorded history, to ask instead of simply file something away. Naira stood there in front of her father, her people, my colleagues, Korvath, and the ancient thing that had exposed both of us to begin with, and I watched her do something I hadn't seen her do in 7 weeks of careful, measured words. She stopped choosing them carefully. "I didn't reject the record because I didn't want to," she said. Loud enough for the whole hall, loud enough that the archive itself seemed to hold whatever passed for its breath. I let the 90 days run because I wanted to know if it was real before I said anything back. I wanted to be sure. She turned, and for the first time in the entire courtship, I watched every trace of careful diplomatic distance drop out of her posture at once. "I am sure. I have been sure since the reactor corridor, if I'm honest, and probably longer than that if I let myself admit it. Korvath, this isn't a matter for review. It was never yours to review." Then to me, in front of everyone, "Ren Osi, I heard what you said, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. I would marry you. If you're asking." The hall was dead silent. Somewhere behind me, one of my engineering buddies whispered, "Oh my God," like we were watching a sports game go into overtime. I didn't have a formal Ilvani reply ready, because nobody prepares you for this. No cultural briefing on the station has a chapter titled "Ancient Sentient Archive Puts You on the Spot in Front of Two Governments While Your Rival Watches." So I did. The only thing that felt true, which was, apparently, the entire point of all of this from the start. I crossed the hall, in front of everyone, and told her, quietly enough, this time on purpose, that only she could hear it. That I'd meant every word I said in the dark, and I'd mean it just as much standing here in the light. The archive logged that, too. I found out later it was the first paired entry it had recorded in over 300 years. Korvath left the chamber without another word, and to his credit, I never heard him raise the matter again. Warden Vell told me afterward, in the closest thing to a smile I ever saw on him, that his son's ambition had always outpaced his patience, and that the archive had simply proven, in front of everyone, which of the two of us had actually been paying attention. We got married on the observation deck. Her choice, not mine. She said it felt right to make our vows in the one place on the station where I'd never once thought to perform for anybody, where the only version of me she'd ever really trusted was the one who thought he was alone. Her father walked her down the narrow corridor to where I was standing, and for once he didn't look like a warden weighing evidence. He looked, briefly, like a man watching his daughter get exactly what she wanted, which is its own kind of legal record, I think. Even if the archive doesn't have a category for it. It's been 8 months now. Her father still brings up the blue glass flower every chance he gets, usually to remind me that I got humiliatingly lucky and should stop pretending it was strategy. Naira still laughs at my terrible jokes, the real laugh, the one that used to be rare, the one I first heard in a hallway full of shocked household staff. Korvath sent a formal, stiffly worded congratulations that Naira keeps in a drawer somewhere, mostly, I think, because she finds it funny. And every once in a while, late at night, I catch her standing near that same observation deck, and I ask her what she's listening for. She always says the same thing, nothing in particular. Just seeing if the quiet still sounds the same, now that she knows exactly what it's capable of holding. So, if you'd been in my position, standing there with an ancient alien intelligence broadcasting your private thoughts to an entire government, would you have run or would you have leaned into it the way I did? Tell me in the comments. I actually read every one of them. And if you like this one, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, because this is exactly the kind of story I make every week, and I'd love to have you back for the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.